Hello and thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. There's loads of other guys on YouTube that break down UFC fights, so I'm really glad that you chose me to listen to. And you are in good hands. I've spent hours and hours and hours researching the fights that I'm going to be breaking down for you today, and hopefully you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash this weekend. I will warn you though, it is extremely difficult making money on any sport. You know, if you go on Twitter, if you go online, everyone talks like a professional gambler, everyone talks like they make money on sports. And we know this isn't the case. It's extremely difficult just to even float around break-even betting sports. If you break even betting sports, you're doing pretty good. To be profitable, you're doing excellent. So always remember to gamble responsibly. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you what to do. Do your own research on fights. Gamble responsibly. And remember, it's very, very difficult to make money betting on any sport. So the game we're playing is difficult. And of course, don't let it take over your life. Don't let it stress you out. Don't allow gambling to become a negative thing for you. But I have been doing this for a long time. I do make a living betting on MMA. And on top of all that, all the information I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is backed up by over a decade of experience. And like I say, hours and hours and hours of research that I've poured into taking a look at each of these fights from a gambling perspective. And remember, all of these breakdowns are from a betting perspective. So we're not focusing on who's more likely to win. We're focusing on which one of these fighters in each one of these matchups is going to give us a better risk to reward ratio. But before we get into that, remember to check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. If you like these breakdowns for the main card fights we're going to be discussing in this video, then you can find much more breakdowns from me for all the prelim fights on this card on my website, MMABettingTips.com. There's a link to that in the description below. You can see it in the background here. On there, you'll find a wide range of bets, all different kind of bets for every UFC event, everything from prop bets, over-unders, straight money line bets. I break down every single fight on every single UFC card on there as well. Go into a little bit more depth on the website as well, where I can like show clips and footage and stuff to illustrate points that I'm trying to make. And you can also talk to myself and other members of the community in the VIP chat room. I'm online like 8 to 10 hours a day. So if you want to talk about, you know, betting other sports, betting UFC, upcoming fights, betting strategies and theories, that's a good place to do it. But with that being said, hopefully you check it out. And if you don't, it's all good. Let's get into breaking down these fights. And the first one that I want to focus on in today's video is going to be Rafael dos Anjos against Rafael Fiziev, the main event. Super interesting matchup this, and as always, we're going to start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. Fiziev, one of the biggest favourites on the card, average odds of about 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, dos Anjos, he is around an average of 2.80, which is plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. Super interesting matchup this. I'm looking forward to sharing all my research with you. So starting off with the tail of the tape, Rafael dos Anjos is 37 years old. He's going to be 38 years old later on this year, and he's 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. Rafael Fiziev, 29 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. So even though RDA has competed at welterweight, both these guys are roughly about the same size, and we know that, as you know, RDA didn't compete at welterweight because he was a particularly big lightweight. He just competed at welterweight because he was struggling to make weight. But in terms of size and wingspan, I'd expect both these guys to be pretty much the same size in there on Saturday night. But there's a big difference in age. We can see that dos Anjos is going to be about 8 years older than Fiziev, which does give Fiziev a pretty big advantage in this. We know that the younger fighter wins close to 70% of the time, close to 70%, 7-0, when there's an 8-year age gap in a fight. So already, if you're blindly betting based off that statistic, that gives Fiziev a pretty big edge going into this matchup. Ultimately, this is a young man's game. We know that, you know, MMA, particularly in the lighter weight classes, is all about speed, reflexes and athleticism, which tend to be some of the first things to go as you start to get older. So being 8 years younger gives Fiziev a big edge in this matchup. And again, when it comes to statistics, the usefulness of statistics, you know, always comes down to if they're correctly interpreted. And what that statistic basically means is, the bigger the age gap in a fight, the more likely it is that the younger guy is closer to their prime than the older guy, right? And this is a perfect example where you've got Fiziev, 29 years old. He's just hitting his prime. He's going to be getting better from fight to fight. Whereas Dos Anjos, 38 years old this year, in the lighter weight classes, the lightweight division, we know that he's going to be declining from fight to fight. So Fiziev's going to be at his absolute best, whereas Dos Anjos, all those wars, all those miles on the clock, all those battles he's been in over the years will start to take their toll on him. He's had over 40 pro fights, and on top of that, he's been to a ton of decisions, right? You look at how many times this guy's been the distance, and obviously the more time you spend in the octagon competing, the more damage you're taking, the more wear and tear you're putting on your body. And on top of that, RDA came into the UFC a very long time ago. It's not like RDA has got over 40 pro fights, with tons of those fights being against low-level opponents on the regional circuit where he wouldn't have been taking that much damage or putting his body through that much trauma. RDA came into the UFC all the way back in 2008. So this guy has been competing against the best fighters in the world for the last 14 years, and as a result putting a lot of wear and tear on his body. Having said that, RDA's looking pretty good for a 37-year-old. By the time you reach this stage in Dos Anjos' career with this many fights, this age, this many miles on the clock, you'd expect Dos Anjos to be declining very, very quickly, but he actually isn't. Obviously, he doesn't look as good as he did back in the day when he was the lightweight champion, but he's still kind of holding his own in the division, and still a problem for a lot of guys in this division because of how well-rounded he is. It's not like when you look at Dos Anjos, there's any big weaknesses that you can exploit. His gas tank's good, his chin is good, his striking's good, his grappling's good. Very well-rounded, doesn't really have many holes, which makes him a formidable opponent for a lot of guys in this division. But this is a good stylistic matchup for both guys in many ways, depending on how this plays out. Both guys have passed the victory here, and it's a very complex, interesting matchup. Both guys obviously have a base in Muay Thai. They're both primarily strikers, but the difference being Fiziev's much more of a specialist, very high-level technical striker, whereas Dos Anjos is a little bit more well-rounded, in fact a lot more well-rounded. He's a good striker, but he's also a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and good MMA wrestler to go with it. So, this fight stays standing. I do see Fiziev doing pretty well. He's very fast, he's very accurate, he's like a sniper. He's got legit one-shot KO power in every strike, very good defensively, very good at reading his opponents. And I think the big difference you're going to see between these two on the feet is the speed. Fiziev is lightning fast, whereas Dos Anjos not quite as fast, not quite as powerful, not quite as explosive. Dos Anjos is one of these guys that kind of just breaks you down with volume, whereas Fiziev has got that sniper approach, just that devastating accuracy and power. But I do think there'll be a big speed gap on the feet, and because Fiziev is so good defensively, I think it's going to be difficult for Dos Anjos early in this matchup to have too much success with his striking. I think early in this fight, Fiziev is going to have a ton of success on the feet. But I've mentioned now a few times that Fiziev is likely to do well early, and that's because I think a big part of this matchup is going to come down to, a big part of how this matchup plays out is going to come down to how Fiziev looks in the later rounds. Because with only 12 pro fights, many of Fiziev's fights ending pretty quickly. You see tons of quick finishes here. Fiziev doesn't have that much experience going deep in fights, into that third round. Doesn't have any experience going into the fourth and fifth rounds because this is his first 5-rounder. And as a result, he won't know how to pace himself over 5 rounds yet because he's never done it. You can't really simulate in the gym the pressure, the emotion, the adrenaline of competing in a real 5-rounder in the main event against a very tough opponent like Dos Anjos. So this is virgin territory for Fiziev. Now, what's interesting about Fiziev is going into his fight against Bobby Green, he also didn't have a lot of experience going the distance. And when he had gone the distance against guys like Alex White and Mark Diakiese, he was so much better than those two that they really couldn't make him work that hard and couldn't really test his gas tank because he was too skilled, too good, and was able to dictate the pace of the fight and control the fight as a result. Then, when he fought Bobby Green, what we saw was Fiziev come out the gate very aggressive in round 1 and light Green up and absolutely dominate. And then in the second round, Fiziev found himself in this position where he had done extremely well against Green. He looked phenomenal in round 1. But Green had taken everything that Fiziev had thrown at him early in that fight. And Fiziev was left in a position in round 2 where he was kind of caught out, because he wasn't used to guys like Green being able to take his best shots, hang in there with him, and still continue to come forward and attack him. Fiziev was used to one of two outcomes. He would either get a quick finish, or he would be so dominant early, the guys would kind of fear him, not want to engage with him, and as a result go into a defensive shell, which again enabled him to pace himself a lot easier, dictate the pace of the fight and control the fight. Bobby Green was really the first guy that took his best shots and continued to come forward and push him to work and push him to engage, and Fiziev had not experienced that before, and so he faded very hard in the second and third round of the Bobby Green fight. Then Fiziev showed really good fight IQ and an ability to learn and adapt in his most recent fight against Brad Riddell, because against Brad Riddell he paced himself much better, he fought much smarter. Instead of coming out the gate super aggressive like he did against Bobby Green and risking burning himself out, he fought at a slow pace, spread his output out nicely, evenly across 3 rounds, stayed very technical, very patient, controlled his heart rate, controlled his breathing, controlled his output, looked absolutely phenomenal, and didn't slow down at all. His gas tank looked amazing, to the point where he was able to get a finish in round 3 against Riddell. So there you've got 2 fights which have both lasted a similar amount of time, but in one fight Fiziev gassed very bad against Bobby Green, and in the other fight his cardio looked amazing against Brad Riddell. And really, it's possible that Fiziev may have trained harder, that's why his cardio looked better against Riddell. But from my perspective, the reason why you saw such a big difference in the cardio of Fiziev between both those fights was because he exerted far more energy against Green than he did against Riddell, because against Green he come out the gate sprinting, sitting down really hard on his shots, trying to knock Green out, throwing a really high volume of strikes, whereas against Riddell he took it a lot easier, a lot more laid back. And so it's clear to me that Fiziev learned a lot in that Bobby Green fight and realised that now he's starting to face tougher guys in the UFC. He's not going to be able to smoke everyone in round 1, and not everyone's going to respect his power no matter how hard he hits them and how much damage he does. So that Riddell fight's a positive sign that Fiziev is moving in the right direction. He's starting to pace himself a lot better. And so with this fight against Dos Anjos, with it being his first 5-rounder, with it being against an extremely well-rounded and extremely tough opponent like Dos Anjos, I would expect quite a slow start, quite a slow pace from Fiziev, where he's not going to want to risk burning himself out early like he did against Green. He's going to want to fight at a slower, steadier pace so that he's much more effective in the second half of the fight into those later rounds. And that makes this fight super interesting from a betting point of view, because if the fight stays standing and Fiziev's gas tank holds up, I think he's going to be too fast, too technical, too good defensively for Dos Anjos. And I think he's going to be able to outstrike Dos Anjos quite comfortably. But where this fight gets super interesting is that Dos Anjos is a lot more well-rounded. He's a very, very strong grappler, good MMA grappler, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Now, if you've watched Rafael Fiziev's past fights, there's not tons of footage on his takedown defense and ground game. You look at his record, he hasn't fought any really strong wrestlers. Brad Riddell's a striker, Green's a striker, Moicano's a striker, Diakiese's a striker, White is a striker, even Mustafayev, even though he's from Dagestan, is also a striker. So we haven't seen any really strong grapplers really test the takedown defense and ground game of Fiziev. But from what we have seen, his takedown defense looks good. Anytime anyone has tried to take him down, his balance has looked excellent. He's stuffed the takedown no problem. And on the rare occasion where guys have got into the ground, he's immediately popped back up to his feet. And I wouldn't expect anything less. Fiziev is trained at Tiger Muay Thai for a really long time, and we know Tiger Muay Thai is one of the best MMA gyms in the world. It's got a good record of producing guys with elite takedown defense. The only exception I can think of is Khalil Roundtree, but when you think of guys like Peter Yan, Arman Tajrukian, these guys that come out of Tiger Muay Thai, guys like Tumanov and Tysomov, they're not easy to take down and hold down. And Fiziev looks like a guy from Tiger Muay Thai that is going to be extremely difficult to take down and hold down. And when it comes to Dos Anjos isn't one of these grapplers that is like really physically imposing and has really tight grappling control. You know, it's not like Dos Anjos is going to be able to ragdoll Fiziev here. And so with how good Fiziev's takedown defense and ground game is, even though Dos Anjos is a good MMA grappler, I don't think Dos Anjos has got the wrestling to take Fiziev down and hold him down early. But again, I'm bringing that word early into the equation because everything about this fight from a betting point of view comes down to how hard Dos Anjos can make Fiziev work early. Because if Dos Anjos can make Fiziev work really hard early on, it increases the probability of Fiziev slowing down in the second half of the fight where Dos Anjos can start to take over. So what's interesting about this matchup is early, I don't think Dos Anjos can get this fight to the ground. His offensive wrestling's not good enough to be able to take down a guy as difficult to take down as Fiziev. But the thing is, Dos Anjos doesn't need to have a lot of success with his grappling early on. He just needs to make Fiziev work. And if Dos Anjos commits quite hard to his grappling early, you know, puts a good pace on Fiziev, forces Fiziev to defend takedowns, then it really doesn't matter what Fiziev tries to do to pace himself. It doesn't matter if he fights at a slower pace, because by Dos Anjos forcing Fiziev to exert energy to defend takedowns, Fiziev's going to naturally gas himself out and slow down like he did against Bobby Green. What I'm trying to say is, in the Brad Riddell fight, because Riddell didn't push the action and force Fiziev to work very hard, once again Fiziev was in total control so he could pace himself nicely. But if Rafael Dos Anjos comes out and forces him to grapple, it doesn't matter whether Dos Anjos is successful with his grappling or not. Ultimately, Rafael Dos Anjos is going to be putting money in the bank by forcing Fiziev to exert energy to defend those takedowns and grapple. So this is a really interesting stylistic matchup where Dos Anjos can cause Fiziev big problems and wear him out and tire him out with grappling. But Dos Anjos has got to take a bit of a leap of faith and understand that he's probably not going to have much success with it early on because of how hard Fiziev is to take down and hold down. But Dos Anjos has just got to persist with it. And if he keeps making Fiziev work, I think it's going to pay off for him big time. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? Well, I do like Fiziev a lot in this fight. I'm very high on Fiziev. I think he's an excellent fighter. But I think his advantages are mostly baked into the odds. If you look at his odds of 1.47 minus 213, they carry an implied probability of 68%. So I think Fiziev's advantages for the most part are reflected in his odds. When it comes to RDA, I do think he gives you the better risk to reward ratio. I do think this is a dog or pass matchup because, you know, ultimately we've seen Fiziev slow down a lot against Bobby Green. This is his first 5-round fight, and we know Dos Anjos can hang in there for 5 rounds and make him work very hard. I don't like the idea of betting a guy like Dos Anjos in his late 30s because this is a young man's game. How often do we see guys in their late 30s lose to guys in their prime? So I understand that Dos Anjos has got his hands full here, but from a pure risk to reward ratio point of view, I think this is dog or pass, and Dos Anjos is the better side to be on because, you know, there's not much upside to betting a big favourite like Fiziev in this odds range. So I do think Fiziev's more likely to win, but I do think from a betting point of view, RDA is going to give you the better risk to reward ratio. I'm not going to be betting this fight. I'm just going to sit back, enjoy it, and you know, hope to be entertained. Hopefully this is a good matchup, but I hope you found that breakdown video useful, and we'll now move on to the next one, which is going to be Caio Borralho against Armen Petrosyan. And on top of that, please also do me a favor, guys. If this video gets 150 likes, I will do a live stream this weekend where I go through every single fight on this card and I try and find a decent over-under bet for every fight on this card. So if you want me to do that live stream where we focus on over-unders to try and dig up some over-under bets, please hit the like button. If this video gets 150 likes, we're going to do that over-under live stream. And try and hit the like button like straight away if you can, pretty fast, because I don't want to be doing the live stream like an hour before the event starts. it would be great if we could hit those 150 likes pretty quick, and then I can do the live stream for the over-unders like Friday night. That would be really cool, and we can talk about the weigh-ins and stuff at the same time then as well. So yeah, hit the like button below. I'd really appreciate it. 150 likes. Let's get that live stream going. But for now, let's talk about this fight between Armen Petrosyan and KO Borralho. So we'll start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and we can see that Borralho is another big favourite, this time at average odds of about 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. His opponent, Petrosyan, is an average of around 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So this was one of the first fights that I researched this week, because I felt KO Borralho could be a really good bet here. Obviously his odds have been steadily declining all week, but from hazy memories, I know that Petrosyan's takedown defense and ground game is pretty bad, and in Borralho's debut against Omar Gadzhiev, his grappling looked pretty good, so I thought Borralho could be a really good bet this weekend, because you should be able to take Petrosyan down, dominate him on the ground. But after researching this fight, I actually look at this fight a little bit differently now, and I wouldn't bet Borralho now with big favourite odds for the reason I'm going to be describing for you in this video. So let's look at the tail of the tape. Borralho, 29 years old, 5'10" with a 75-inch reach. Petrosyan, 31 years old, 6'2" with a 71-inch reach. So no major X factors there. Both guys are around about the same age. Borralho has got a slightly longer reach, but Petrosyan is a bit taller, so I don't think X factors are going to be too major here. In terms of how these two guys match up stylistically, Petrosyan is a pure kickboxer. He's going to want to treat the ground like lava. This guy is a striker, and there's not a lot else to his game. KO Borralho, on the other hand, is a lot more well-rounded. On the feet, he's got a sideways karate, Lyoto Machida style of striking, where he stands in like a nice wide base, hands down low, and he looks to pop in and out of his opponent's range and chip away at them. Petrosyan, much more of a traditional kickboxing style, but Borralho has also got, pretty good ground game, decent jiu-jitsu, decent MMA grappling, and so Borralho is much more well-rounded here. Now, if the fight stays on the feet, I do give Petrosyan a bit of an advantage here, just because when I look at both guys, Petrosyan's just an absolute dog. He's got legit one-shot KO power in his hands. He's got nasty kicks. He's got a decent gas tank. He fights at a reasonably high pace, and he's just vicious and mean and nasty on the feet. Borralho, on the other hand, is more of a point fighter. He likes to chip away at you with that karate style, but I don't think he's as good defensively as Petrosyan, and on the feet he's definitely nowhere near as dangerous as Petrosyan. Borralho's more of a volume striker, where Petrosyan can legitimately hurt you very bad on the feet and put you away. So I think if this fight stays standing, Petrosyan's likely to do pretty well. And this is where this fight can become difficult for KO Borralho, because if you look at his debut against Omar Gadzhiev, to the naked eye is quite impressive. Omar Gadzhiev, is one of these Dagestani type fighters that you'd usually assume to be a really strong grappler just based on his appearance. And the fact that Borralho was able to take this guy down and pretty much dominate him on the ground is very impressive, right? I mean, look at this guy. He's got the Dagestani beard. Guys that look like Omar Gadzhiev, with a name like Omar Gadzhiev, with a record like Omar Gadzhiev, they're usually a nightmare on the ground. So when a guy like Borralho comes along and dominates a guy like Omar Gadzhiev on the ground, we should all take notice. But when you actually study footage on Borralho, you realise that not everything is as it seems. And one of the reasons, or in fact the reason, why Borralho had so much success on the ground against Omar Gadzhiev in his UFC debut is because Omar Gadzhiev is a guy that gives up weak takedowns. He's very weak off his back. If you take him down and obtain a dominant position, he doesn't make much of an effort to work through that position and get back up to his feet. And Omar Gadzhiev makes a lot of mistakes on the ground where he hesitates to work out of bad positions. So if you go back and watch the Omar Gadzhiev versus Borralho fight and you understand grappling, you'll see that Omar Gadzhiev makes a lot of mistakes, and Borralho punishes him for those mistakes. But what you'll also see is Borralho also makes a lot of mistakes, but because Omar Gadzhiev hesitates in positions and doesn't really punish Borralho for them, doesn't try and create scrambles, Borralho is able to get away with making a lot of mistakes on the ground. If you then go back and watch Borralho's fight on the Contender Series against Aaron Jeffrey, you'll see that Jeffrey does a much better job of resisting takedowns, working his way back up to his feet when he had been taken down, and also punishing Borralho for making mistakes on the ground. And Borralho doesn't look anywhere near as good against Darren Jeffrey as he did against Omar Gadzhiev. So what I'm trying to say is that Omar Gadzhiev is very bad on the ground, and he made Borralho look a lot better on the ground than he actually is. If you go and take a look at Borralho's fights against Omar Gadzhiev and Jeffrey, you're going to see a really big difference in the effectiveness of Borralho's grappling. For me, he's not the best offensive wrestler. He doesn't have very good grappling control. He's quite loosey-goosey on the ground and gives his opponents a lot of space. And that could spell trouble for him in this fight, because Armen Petrosyan is one of these guys that is quite easy to take down. Like, his takedown offense isn't that good, but he is pretty good at working his way back up to his feet. He's a big, strong guy, and when you take him down, he usually shows a lot of urgency to pop back up. Now, he is very low level on the ground. Like, he does expose his back a lot, and I can't imagine his submission defense is particularly good, which does give Borralho a lot of opportunity to put him in bad positions on the ground. But for me, when you look at Borralho's odds of 1.44 minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. For me to bet Borralho at these odds, or to find value in Borralho at these odds, I would want to have absolutely no doubt in my mind that Borralho can come into this matchup with a grappling heavy game plan, take Petrosyan down and dominate him on the ground. And based on past performances, I don't feel like that, because Borralho's offensive wrestling is not great and his grappling control is not great either. So even though Petrosyan's pretty easy to take down, I do think Petrosyan can have a lot of success working his way back up to his feet when he gets taken down. And as a result, if Petrosyan can keep long periods of this fight standing, I think he's going to do really well with his striking. So this is one of those situations where, if you do want to bet this fight, I would definitely bet Borralho. I think Borralho is a lot more likely to win. I'd prefer to bet Borralho this weekend, but I really don't think you're getting a very good deal betting on this guy at an implied probability of 69%. Because his grappling is really, really unconvincing, and I think there's a lot of ways Petrosyan can make this one close, competitive, and really sweaty for you if you pay the juice and bet Borralho as a pretty big favourite. So I hope you found that useful. I know a lot of people are on Borralho this week, and I would just strongly recommend that you go and take a look at his fight on the Contender Series and his last fight, and you'll see some holes in his grappling which could get him into trouble against Petrosyan. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Will you be betting this fight this weekend? We now move into talking about the next matchup, which is going to be Douglas Silva de Andrade against Said Nurmagomedov. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that Nurmagomedov is a pretty big favourite, average odds of about 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Douglas Silva de Andrade, he's around an average of 3.70, which is going to be plus 270 for an implied probability of 27%. So Said Nurmagomedov is 30 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. Douglas Silva de Andrade, 37 years old, 5'7" with a 68.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same size, but you can see a big difference in age here. Said Nurmagomedov is 7 years younger than Douglas Silva de Andrade, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 67% of the time when there is a 7-year age gap in a fight, and that statistic is really meaningful in this matchup because it's at that sweet spot where Andrade is in his late 30s and you'd expect him to be declining from fight to fight. And to be fair, he is showing signs over the last few years of declining, whereas Nurmagomedov, 30 years old, he's in his prime. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight, and he absolutely is. If you look at how Nurmagomedov looked in his debut against Justin Scoggins and compare that to when we got a good look at him when he went the distance against Ronnie Barcelos, he's improved by an order of magnitude in between the Scoggins and Barcelos fight. So you're going to be expecting big improvements from Nurmagomedov from fight to fight. So the surname Nurmagomedov is synonymous with very strong grapplers, and while Said Nurmagomedov's grappling is not bad, he's actually more of a striker, stands in a nice sideways karate stance, and his style of striking is very similar to Umar Nurmagomedov's that we saw compete a few weeks ago against Nate Maness. Likes to stand in a nice sideways karate stance and he's very good defensively. He's very good at reading his opponents. He likes to chip away at his opponents with volume strikes. Very difficult defensively, though. It's difficult to get to him. And I think that's going to make this a difficult stylistic matchup for De Andrade, because De Andrade doesn't have the grappling to take Nurmagomedov down. So Nurmagomedov's going to be able to dictate where this fight takes place. And if Nurmagomedov wants to keep the fight on the feet, De Andrade is more of a single shot power striker that likes to load up on big singular shots. And because Nurmagomedov reads his opponents very well and he moves so well, it's going to be difficult for De Andrade to load up on those big singular shots and land on him. So, De Andrade may land the odd big shot here and there that hurts Nurmagomedov, but I think it's going to be really difficult for De Andrade to keep up with the volume striking of Nurmagomedov. So with Nurmagomedov's footwork and movement being so good, his ability to fight long and throw a much higher volume of strikes, the fight stays on the feet. I think you're going to see Nurmagomedov just chip away at De Andrade from a safe distance, try and avoid eating any of those big power shots that Andrade is going to be throwing from the hip. Nurmagomedov should be pretty comfortable in out-voluming him. In terms of grappling, De Andrade is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but his takedown defense is pretty bad and he's a little bit weak off his back. At this stage in De Andrade's career, he also gets tired quite quickly if you force him to grapple. And so even though Nurmagomedov is primarily a striker, he's a far better grappler than De Andrade at this stage in their careers. He's obviously got a base in combat sambo, so if Nurmagomedov wanted to use a grappling heavy game plan here, he'd likely have a lot of success. So this is one of those matchups where Nurmagomedov has got the advantage standing up and on the ground, and he should be able to win the fight pretty comfortably wherever it goes. Unfortunately, his odds reflect that. He's a big favourite, and from my perspective, there's not that much upside in betting Nurmagomedov at these odds. Ultimately, Andrade is a tough dude that hits hard. We saw what he did to Morozov in his last fight, where dropped Morozov and wobbled him multiple times. And while it is unlikely that he does that against Nurmagomedov, it's also possible. So it's very dangerous betting Nurmagomedov at big favourite odds. But this is one of those matchups where, due to Andrade's age and the fact that he's outgunned both standing up and on the ground, certainly don't see enough in Andrade to make me want to bet him. So pretty dead fight from a betting point of view, where Nurmagomedov should win, but his odds reflect that. So I hope you found that useful. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about that one as we go into breaking down the next fight, which is going to be Chase Sherman against Jared Vanderaa. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Jared Vanderaa is the favourite at average odds of about 1.50, which is going to be minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. And his opponent, Chase Sherman, is around an average of 2.70, which is going to be plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So Chase Sherman is 32 years old, 6'4" with a 78-inch reach, and Jared Vanderaa is 30 years old, 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same age, roughly about the same size. And for heavyweights, these two are very, very young. Being in your early 30s for a heavyweight is very young. The heavyweights tend to peak at a later stage in their careers than guys in the lighter weight classes. And so in the case of Vanderaa and Sherman, we could see big improvements from these guys from fight to fight. When it comes to Chase Sherman, we haven't really seen him improve that much. But in the case of Jared Vanderaa, we've seen him improve a lot in a short space of time. This may have gone unnoticed because on paper he's obviously lost a lot of fights in the UFC. But if you take a look at footage on Vanderaa from before he came into the UFC and compare it to how he looked against Justin Taffer and Andrei Arlovsky, you can see that this guy is making exponential improvements from fight to fight. And so that makes it kind of difficult to predict what we're going to see this weekend from these two, because we don't know what version of Jared Vanderaa we're going to get. Now, in terms of how these two guys match up stylistically, they both are primarily strikers. Chase Sherman has got a base in Muay Thai, Vanderaa more of a boxer. And on the feet, you definitely give Chase Sherman the advantage. He throws a higher volume of strikes, he's more technical, throws a more diverse range of attacks. With Sherman, you're going to get punches and leg kicks and body kicks and head kicks, whereas Vandeera's got some nice kicks, but for the most part, he's kind of a slow, plodding, flat-footed boxer. So early on, I would imagine Sherman to do pretty well on the feet. Now, in terms of grappling, Neither of these guys are very good grapplers. They're both extremely low level on the ground. They both have bad takedown defense and they're very weak off their back. But Vanderaa has an advantage on the ground. Not a very big one, but he is better than Sherman on the ground. And in many ways, this is a similar sort of stylistic matchup to a fight we broke down recently between Josh Petrosyan and Alan Baudot, where we were saying, look, Baudot and Petrosyan both have bad takedown defense. They're both very bad on the ground. However, Petrosyan is slightly better than Baudot when it comes to grappling. And so that could be a slight path to victory for Petrosyan. If Petrosyan were to come in with a grappling heavy game plan, because he's just a little bit better than Baudot on the ground, you know, that could give him a great chance of winning. And of course, we saw Petrosyan use a grappling heavy game plan to defeat Baudot. The same thing kind of applies here. Vanderaa is a very bad grappler, but you don't need to be a good grappler to take someone like Sherman down and cause him big trouble on the ground. So out of these two, Vanderaa is the more likely to grapple, and if he were to grapple, he might have a decent amount of success here because how easy it is to take Sherman down and how weak Sherman is off his back. So both these guys are very bad when it comes to grappling, but with Vanderaa having a slight edge, it does give him a path to victory here. Now, to summarise how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view, I really think this fight's going to come down to Sherman's gas tank. Because remember, we said Sherman is the better striker out of these two, and with both these guys being strikers, it's very likely this is going to be a stand-up fight. And so, with Sherman being the striker, this likely being the better striker, this being a stand-up fight, you give Sherman the edge in this one. But where it gets complicated is that Sherman slows down a lot as fights wear on. And when he slows down, he becomes very sloppy and very easy to hit. Whereas Vanderaa has got a really good gas tank for a heavyweight. So even though he's not as technically skilled as Sherman, he can perform closer to his full potential for the full 3 rounds. So what we've got here is a superior fighter in Sherman from a technical point of view, but he can't perform close to his full potential for very long before becoming sloppy and slow and, you know, easy to hit. Whereas Vanderaa, even deep into the 3rd round, will still be able to perform, you know, to a similar level what we see from him early on. So this matchup is a difficult one to predict because Sherman's likely to do pretty well, but at some point in this fight, he's going to start to slow, and when that happens, the skill gap is going to get closed, and then we could see momentum swing in Vandeera's favour. So when it comes to fights like this, I would much prefer the better guy like Vanderaa that I know can perform to their full potential over the full 3 rounds, and he also has an advantage on the ground, as opposed to someone like Sherman that we know by midway point of round 2 probably going to be pretty sloppy, pretty gassed, and as a result not that effective. So I definitely lean towards Jared Vanderaa here, but again, his advantages are pretty much baked into his odds, and you know, I'm not sure Vanderaa should be this big of a favourite over anyone in the division. You know, he's won him 3 in his last 4 fights. Vanderaa, low-level heavyweight, but he is more likely to win this one. It's just from a betting point of view, I don't think there's a strong position on either side to put your money, so I won't be betting this fight myself. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And also, don't forget to hit the like button if you want me to do that over-under live stream this weekend, where we try and find an over-under bet on every single fight on this card. Hit the like button below. 150 likes will get it popping. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Cynthia Calvillo against Nina Nunes. Very interesting matchup this. When I started to research this card this week, Cynthia Calvillo was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet. But when I actually finished researching this matchup, I completely changed my opinion on how I see this fight playing out, and I'm looking forward to sharing my research and findings with you guys. So let's start by taking a look at the odds. Calvillo is the favourite at average odds of about 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. And if we take a look at the odds on her opponent, Nina Nunes, she is around an average of 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Cynthia Calvillo, 34 years old, she's going to be 35 years old next week, 5'4" with a 64-inch reach, and Nina Nunes, 36 years old, she's 37 later on in the year, 5'5" with a 64-inch reach. So both girls are roughly about the same size. definitely in the tail ends of their careers. They're both fighting at flyweight this weekend, and for flyweights, they're getting pretty old. The lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism, and with these two girls being in their mid-30s, they're definitely in the tail end of their careers, and at that stage in their careers where they're going to be declining from fight to fight. And to be fair, we have seen signs of decline in both these fighters. Calvillo, every time we've seen her over the last few years, she's looked worse and worse and worse. And Nina Nunes, congratulations to Nunes. She's had a child, over the last couple of years. And so it's difficult to bounce back from that. It changes the female body forever, puts a lot of stress on the body, and it takes a long time to bounce back. We have seen fighters bounce back and look great after having a child. Mackenzie Dern, probably the best example I can think of. But Mackenzie Dern was a lot younger when she had her child. I think Mackenzie Dern was in her mid-20s when she had her child. Nina Nunes in her mid-30s. And just Mother Nature, Father Time. As we get older, our bodies become less resilient. It's harder for us to get back in shape, harder for us to recover, and having a child puts a lot of stress on the female body. It's an incredible miracle. It's amazing that it happens, but it's very difficult for female athletes to bounce back after having a child, and the older they get, the harder it is to bounce back. So Nina Nunes, now being a mum, will likely have accelerated the rate at which she's going to decline. And at the age of 37, she's just not going to be capable of what she was capable of earlier in her career. So both these girls, I would expect to be on a pretty steep decline coming into this matchup. Now, from a stylistic point of view, classic striker versus grappler matchup. Nunes is going to have a huge advantage on the feet, and Calvillo is going to have a huge advantage on the ground. So when we're breaking this fight down and trying to predict who's more likely to win, the question we need to answer is how likely is it that Calvillo is going to be able to get this fight to the ground and keep this fight on the ground. Now, from memory, the reason why Calvillo jumped out at me as a potential bet this week and was one of the first names I thought to research on this card is because, from memory, Nunes has got really bad takedown defense. She's quite weak off her back. She's quite low level on the ground, whereas Calvillo is a really good grappler. And therefore, because Calvillo will be able to dictate where the fight takes place with her wrestling and her grappling, this should be a good stylistic matchup for her. But when you actually dig into the detail in this matchup, I think this could be a pretty difficult stylistic fight for Calvillo, because what we often see being the thing that determines the outcome of UFC fights is which fighter uses the more effective strategy and game plan. So many fights are not decided by who's the more skilled fighter. Instead, they're decided by who fights smarter, who avoids making mistakes, who has the better game plan. And what I can say about Cynthia Calvillo is that her strategies and game plans are consistently extremely bad. And so, as a result of that, Nunes has got a pretty good chance of winning this weekend, because Calvillo really has no striking at all. She doesn't move particularly well on the feet. She's not that good defensively. She's got no power in her hands to hurt her opponents. And as a result, she absolutely has to get fights to the ground, or she almost always struggles very bad when it comes to striking. She also slows down a lot as fights wear on, so she becomes quite sloppy in the second half of fights, which makes it even easier to outstrike her. And with Nunes being a black belt in Taekwondo, pretty decent striking, Nunes is going to win this fight very, very comfortably on this, if the fight stays on the feet. So Calvillo absolutely has to get this fight to the ground. Now, Nunes has got really bad takedown defense and really bad ground game. She's very weak off her back. So to the naked eye, Calvillo could be a pretty good bet this weekend. But the problem with Calvillo is that she just doesn't wrestle very much at all. What you see from Calvillo is, on average, she only shoots like one, maybe 1.5 takedowns per round. And if you stuff the takedown that she shoots at you in that round, she won't try and get you back to the ground for the remainder of that round. So she's one of these fighters that is infuriating, because even against opponents that she has huge advantages over on the ground, she just doesn't try that hard to take them down. She'll shoot a takedown, and then if they stuff it, she'll go right back to the center of the octagon and stand and strike, where, like we've said, she gets outstruck against virtually everyone. So she's very frustrating, because she's got great grappling control, decent takedown entries, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's very slick on the ground, but she often doesn't get an opportunity to show how good she is on the ground because she doesn't really try to take her opponents down that much. And that's what makes this an interesting fight, because Nina Nunes is one of these fighters that, because she's a very good striker, she's very good at reading her opponents. She's really good at reading subtle changes in body language and movement, which enables her to see takedown entries coming very early. And so her initial takedown defense is excellent. I would compare Nina Nunes' takedown defense to someone like a Germaine de Randamie or a Uriah Hall that we saw last weekend, or a Michael Johnson that we've got on this card. And at this point you're probably saying, well, hang on a minute, Chris. Germaine de Randamie's takedown defense and ground game sucks, and so does Uriah Hall's. Like, Munoz dominated him on the ground last week, and I agree with you. But what you'll notice about fighters like Uriah Hall and Germaine de Randamie and Nina Nunes and Michael Johnson is that their initial takedown defense is actually excellent. And what I mean by that is, when their opponent initially shoots in on them and tries to take them down, they're really good at stuffing the takedown initially, showing good balance, clearing their legs, starting to get underhooks in play. But they then become very easy to take down if their opponents start to chain wrestle and persist with the takedown. If they drive them into the cage and start switching from double legs to single legs to body locks, that's when guys like Uriah Hall and de Randamie and Nunes and Johnson become very easy to take down. Go back and think about the second round of the Munoz versus Uriah Hall fight last week. Remember, Munoz was initially shooting in for takedowns in round 2 against Hall, and Hall was feeding him that single leg and hopping around on one leg and doing a really good job of stuffing the takedowns. And then when Munoz drove through on that takedown, put Hall against the cage and started chain wrestling, then Uriah Hall got taken down easily. But stuffing that initial takedown, Hall did a great job of that and gave Munoz some trouble. Nina Nunes is exactly like that. And the difference between Calvillo and someone like Andre Munoz is that Calvillo doesn't chain wrestle. She doesn't persist with her takedown attempts. If Calvillo shoots a takedown and you stuff it, she's like, alright, cool, I'm not going to get it. And she retreats back to the centre of the octagon and starts to stand and strike and kickbox. And that's where this matchup becomes really interesting, because to take someone like Nunes down, you usually need to chain wrestle and be a little bit more persistent with your grappling. And we never see that from Calvillo. She is a single shot grappler. She'll shoot that one takedown attempt, and then if you stuff it, she'll give up on it, and she won't go back to it for some time, 3-4 minutes at a time, or entire rounds can go by where she doesn't shoot a takedown. So I do actually lean towards Nina Nunes in this fight, because if both these girls show up and perform like they usually do, I don't think Calvillo's style of wrestling and her usual game plan is going to be enough to keep big chunks of this fight on the ground where she's going to have a huge advantage. Having said that, Nunes' takedown offense is very poor, so if Calvillo does get the fight to the ground, she's going to be able to dominate Nunes on the ground. And on top of that, at the stage of the career that Nunes is in, late 30s after having a baby, Nunes is going to be on a steep decline, so perhaps her takedown offense and ground game has declined a lot since 2019, which was the last time we had a good look at it. But, in a situation where both these girls are in that even money odds range, I'd much prefer to have my money on the slight dog here on Nunes. There's so many risk factors with betting either of these girls that I'm not going to bet this fight myself. But from my perspective, both girls have extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak. And so in that situation, I'd much prefer to have my money on the underdog here. And I do think Calvillo's style of grappling could get her into a lot of trouble with this matchup. Now, let's talk about the final fight that I want to cover in this breakdown video. And don't forget, if you like these breakdowns and you want to watch my breakdown videos for all the prelims on this card, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. You'll find breakdown videos for all fights on there. But for now, we're going to be breaking down the final fight on this main card, which is Michael Johnson against Jamie Mullarkey. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds. We can see that Mullarkey is pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.44, minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Michael Johnson, we can see that he's around an average of 2.0, maybe call it 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of, no, that's not correct, plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Michael Johnson, 36 years old, 5'10" with 73.5-inch reach. Mullarkey, 27 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So in terms of size, both guys roughly about the same size. Mullarkey a little bit taller, but nothing major. But again, we've spoken a lot about the impact that age can have on the outcome of MMA fights in this video. We're going to mention it again because Michael Johnson at 36 years old means that Mullarkey is going to be 9 years younger than him. And we know that the younger fighter wins around about 70% of the time when there's a 9-year age gap in a fight. That's 7-0, 70% of the time when there is a 9-year age gap in a fight, which obviously does give Mullarkey a pretty big statistical advantage in this one. And what we do know about Michael Johnson is that he is declining a lot from fight to fight. His reflexes aren't as sharp as they used to be. He's not as dangerous on the feet. He's just not as sharp. He doesn't move as well, doesn't read his opponents as well. And so this is a really good stylistic matchup for Mullarkey, and Mullarkey was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. I think Mullarkey wins this fight a very high percentage of the time, but again, unfortunately, at odds of 1.44 minus 227, you have to feel that for the most part, Mullarkey's advantages are baked into the odds. But with the stage in their careers that both these guys are in, I do think Mullarkey is better than Johnson everywhere. I know that Johnson built a career off being a very high-level striker, but in recent years we've seen Michael Johnson get outstruck by Clay Guida and run into trouble on the feet against Alan Patrick. And at this stage in their careers, Jamie Mullarkey is a far better striker than both Guida and Patrick. Mullarkey moves well, he's a decent boxer, you know, he hits pretty hard, and like I say, Johnson's reflexes just aren't there anymore. He doesn't see the shots coming. So I think Mullarkey's a more dangerous striker at this stage in their careers and can edge Johnson on the feet. But the area in which Mullarkey has a real big advantage in this fight is obviously on the ground. Throughout Michael Johnson's career, his biggest weakness has been his takedown defense and ground game. And unlike Cynthia Calvillo that we spoke about in the last breakdown, Mullarkey has the chain wrestling and the persistent style of grappling to get Johnson to the ground and rack up a lot of top control and beat Johnson up on the ground. Mullarkey's not an amazing grappler, but you don't need to beat to cause Johnson big trouble on the ground. So I do give Mullarkey a bit of an advantage on the feet, not a huge one, but definitely an advantage. But I do give Mullarkey a giant advantage on the ground. If Mullarkey comes into this one with a grappling heavy game plan, I think he's going to be able to take Johnson to the ground and absolutely dominate. And that's why, I think Mullarkey wins this a very high percentage of the time. It's a shame that he's such a big favourite, because if his odds were better, Mullarkey is definitely someone that I would be betting this weekend. But yeah, I expect Mullarkey to do really well here. The only real risk factor that I can think of if you're betting Mullarkey this weekend is that Mullarkey's not the best defensively. He's been rocked, dropped, wobbled, knocked down in most of his fights in the UFC. We saw, Jalen Turner wobble him a couple of times, finish him in round 2. Devontae Smith wobbled him. Brad Riddell knocked him down multiple times. So even though Mullarkey does have a good chin, and he's very tough, very difficult to put away, very good at recovering when he gets hurt, he does get dinged and he does get wobbled, and it's dangerous to bet a big favourite like Mullarkey in the odds range that he's in against a guy like Johnson that has got power. Power ultimately is the last thing to go. Johnson's hurt a lot of guys on the feet throughout his entire career, and it only takes one shot to land to cause a guy like Mullarkey big trouble, and Mullarkey is susceptible to get hit. But that's really the only weakness here. If Mullarkey doesn't get knocked out, I think he wins every time. I don't see Johnson out striking him. I don't see Johnson out grappling him. But that doesn't mean that Johnson can't land a bomb and knock Mullarkey out. So that is going to be it for this breakdown video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like on the video if you really appreciated this breakdown. You want to see that over under live stream later on in the week. As soon as the video gets 150 likes, we will do that over under live stream. And also leave a comment. Let me know what you think about these breakdowns. Let me know what your bets are this weekend. Subscribe also if you haven't already. And thank you very much for watching. Hope you crush it this weekend and make loads of money. Take care, guys. Have a good week, a good weekend. I love you all. I'll see you all really soon. Nice one, guys. Bye.